Last time on Vegan Siths, we watched the rat fleet trade the open ocean for a fenced-off salvage lot in Vallejo, California. It was supposed to be a land-based utopia of stealth RVs and cognitive liberty. Instead, it became a literal battleground. When their landlord, Curtis Lin, tried to reclaim his property from his non-paying visionary tenants, the Zizians didn't just move out. They allegedly moved in, with samurai swords and kitchen knives. Lin survived that first ambush by the skin of his teeth, only to be finished off 2 years later by a pigtail-wearing data scientist who seemingly wanted to save the world one jugular at a time. While Alex Latham and Suri Dow were busy failing at cinematic prison breaks and faking seizures in court, the group's leader, Ziz Lasota, was performing her own disappearing act. She faked her death in the San Francisco Bay, resurfaced as a mysterious blonde named Julia, and then simply walked out of a police station during a medical emergency. But California was only the beginning. While the courts were trying to figure out who was mentally competent to stand trial, the Zizian ideology was already migrating 3,000 miles east. 1 month after the first attempt on the life of Curtis Lin, the Zizians struck again, this time in the affluent Philadelphia suburb of Chester Heights. And in this quiet neighborhood, the Zizians would ring in the new year with a double homicide. I'm your host, Andrew Westland, and this is Vegan Siths. Chester Heights is a quiet borough in Delaware County with a population just shy of 3,000. It's best known as the headquarters of Wawa, the East Coast's beloved gas station and Hoagie empire. Beyond that, not much to write home about. It's the kind of place you drive through without even noticing. You could think of it as any town USA. It was December 31st, 2022, and 71-year-old Rita Zajko and his wife Rita, age 69, were no doubt ready to ring in the new year. It had been a chaotic 12 months on the global stage, to say the least. Russia invaded Ukraine. Queen Elizabeth II had died at age 96. And back home in the US, nearly 50 years of legal precedent was upended with the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And while COVID was starting to fade from the headlines, finally, the world wasn't exactly back to normal. If anything, it felt more fractured than ever, as disinformation, outrage, and algorithmic echo chambers radicalized minds from Memphis to Milan to Melbourne. So, like every New Year's Eve, but especially this one, people were counting on a reset. Or at least the illusion of one. Rick worked for a company contracted at the nearby Navy Yard. Rita stayed at home. The couple lived a quiet life, caring for Rita's aging parents with help from in-home caregivers, according to Rick's sister-in-law, Roseanne Zajko. They'd made it to the final hours, actually, the final minutes of 2022, and they probably thought they'd make it to midnight. It would take a really cruel twist of fate to rob them of that. The same kind of twist, perhaps, that claimed Hollywood icon Betty White the year before, when she died on New Year's Eve, just shy of her 100th birthday. Imagine the standard scene. Couple unwinding, maybe checking the clock, or waiting to watch the Times Square ball drop from the comfort of their couch. But whatever Rick and Rita actually had planned that night, they never got a chance to see it through. Here's what we currently know about that night, as of this recording in mid-2026. At 11:29 p.m., a vehicle pulls into the Zajko's driveway, captured on a neighbor's Ring doorbell camera. A minute later, two figures step out into the cold winter air. It's right then that the audio picks up a desperate, high-pitched commotion.
Mom! God! Oh, God! God!
Seconds later, they move to the front door and enter the house, and a light clicks on upstairs. Then, at 11:39 p.m., the two figures exit the front door, get back into the car, and drive away into the night. Now, for a long time, the identities of those two figures fleeing into the dark had remained unconfirmed. The scream itself was parsed by local investigators, with some early sources skeptical about whether the word mom was even audible. The next morning, so this would be New Year's Day 2023, Rita Zajko texted Rita to wish her a Happy New Year, but she never got a reply. On Monday, January 2nd, 2023, police performed a wellness check after the couple failed to show up to care for Rita's parents. This was very unlike them. That's when officers discovered a nightmare. Rick and Rita were dead in one of the upstairs rooms. Both had been executed. According to autopsy reports conducted on January 4th, Rita was killed with a single gunshot to the back of the head. Rick had been shot in the right temple and had defensive injuries on his right hand. A jacketed hollow-point bullet was recovered from his skull and entered into evidence. Now let's pause here for a second, because the immediate question is an obvious one. What does a brutal double homicide in suburban Philly have to do with a fringe tech commune operating thousands of miles away? It's a fair question, and at the time, it hadn't occurred to local police either. There was no reason for investigators in Pennsylvania to call up their counterparts in California. As far as they knew, this was just a tragic, insular crime. A quiet couple killed in their home. No obvious motive and no immediate suspects. It would take a series of bizarre discoveries across state lines before anyone realized that the call was coming from inside the house. From the outset, Pennsylvania State Police were quick to emphasize that this had all the markings of a targeted execution. Inside the home, troopers found a Pennsylvania driver's license belonging to Michelle Zajko, the only child of Rick and Rita. Crucially, their parents hadn't been killed just anywhere. They were found in what had once been Michelle's childhood playroom. The home, owned by the family since the late 1980s, was tucked at the end of a cul-de-sac in a neighborhood full of young families. It was stately, quiet, comfortable. All signs point to a relatively privileged upbringing for Michelle, who often went by the name Jamie. They had creative ambitions, spending much of their free time writing fantasy fiction. Michelle eventually enrolled at Cabrini University, where they majored in biology and got involved with effective altruism, or EA, the data-driven philanthropic arm of the broader rationalist movement. Hours before the murders that New Year's Eve, Rita texted Michelle. It was, according to the San Francisco Chronicle, an olive branch, a text attempting to resolve some kind of rift, and to wish Michelle a happy birthday. Michelle never replied to their mother's final text. Investigators quickly tracked Michelle's digital footprint up to northern Vermont. Sure enough, 2022 voter rolls listed both a Michelle Zajko and someone named Alice Monday as residents of Coventry, Vermont. They shared an unfinished cabin on a 20-acre wooded lot purchased through an anonymous trust. A trust allegedly tied to Monday, a former romantic partner of Michelle's and an early mentor of sorts to Ziz Lasota. Troopers headed to Coventry, hoping to locate Michelle and maybe find the murder weapon. They found Michelle, but Alice Monday wasn't there. Instead, Michelle was rooming with Daniel Blank, a cisgender man with thick black glasses who had recently been a student at UC Berkeley. During what law enforcement logged as a voluntary interview, Michelle laid out an alibi. They claimed that they'd been home in Vermont with Daniel Blank from December 29th through January 2nd. insisting that they hadn't set foot in Pennsylvania since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. They also claimed that they hadn't spoken to their parents in over a year. Michelle told the troopers they drove a 2013 green Subaru Outback, acknowledged receiving their mother's text message, and admitted to owning a firearm, a Smith & Wesson pistol. They even allowed investigators to inspect it. The visual inspection set off immediate alarm bells. The gun was flagged as a potential match for the ballistics in Chester Heights. According to Vermont State Police, the bullet recovered from Rita Zajko's skull bore microscopic markings consistent with that exact manufacturer and model. A court filing later noted that the weapon appeared well kept and recently cleaned, completely free of residue or debris. Then came the paper trail. Records revealed that Michelle had attempted to buy a firearm at a sporting goods store in Irisburg, Vermont on February 3, 2022. Only the sale was initially balked because they presented a California driver's license. But the very next day, they returned with a fresh Vermont license and successfully walked out with a 9mm handgun, a holster, and boxes of ammunition. The brand and type of ammunition they purchased matched the exact spent casings left on the floor of their childhood playroom. When the family's caregiver first reached Michelle by phone to break the news of their parents' deaths, Michelle claimed they wouldn't be able to make it down to Pennsylvania because they didn't have a car, which was seemingly a blatant lie, considering they told law enforcement about driving a Subaru. Then came a truly chilling detail from the caregiver. Around the time of the funeral, Michelle bypassed the family entirely, showing up unannounced at their grandmother's house. The two spoke in Italian at first, then, switching to English, Michelle looked at their grandmother and whispered,
"I'm sorry, Nana."
The caregiver later recalled looking into Michelle's eyes in that moment. They were completely vacant. On January 12, 2023, a judge granted a warrant to search the Coventry cabin to seize the gun. But by the time the police arrived, the Smith & Wesson was nowhere to be found. Now, they were able to recover 3 loose 9mm cartridges. But without the firearm itself, definitive ballistics testing was stalled. The breakthrough would have to come from somewhere else, and it came later that exact same day. Pennsylvania state troopers secured a second warrant, this one for Michelle's Subaru Outback and a room at the Candlewood Suites near the Philadelphia airport, just 10 miles from the crime scene. Turns out, they'd secretly rented a room around the time of their parents' funeral, completely contradicting their earlier claim that they had no way to travel to Pennsylvania. Troopers swarmed the hotel, looking for the missing gun and planning to collect a DNA sample from Michelle. When police knocked on the door of room 218 at the Candlewood Suites, Michelle seemed to stall. After a brief standoff, officers used a keycard to breach the door and detain them. As a handcuffed Michelle was escorted through the lobby, they turned to the hotel staff and shouted,
"He's staying in room 111.
The he was Daniel Blank. Trooper Matthew Gibson recognized the name from the Vermont interviews, but a quick check of the hotel registry showed that Blank had checked in under an alias, Daniel Black. One letter. He changed one letter. When troopers knocked on room 111, Blank refused to open the door, demanding a lawyer. And because the active warrant was only for Michelle's room, the troopers had to halt and draft fresh paperwork. While they waited, investigators pulled the hotel's security footage from the previous evening. The tape showed Michelle walking down the hall carrying a light-colored cloth bag. They knock on the door to room 111, drop the bag on the floor, and walk away. That appeared to be enough for a judge to sign the warrant. Just after midnight, police were back at the Candlewood Suites and kicked down the door to room 111. The shower was running, and inside the bathroom, officers found Daniel Blank. And tucked away alongside him was none other than Ziz Lasota. After faking her death in the San Francisco Bay just months prior, this was the last place anyone expected her to show up. A suburban hotel bathroom outside Philly? This marks Ziz's second known reappearance, following her brief stint using a fake name at Curtis Lynn's trailer yard. While Blank surrendered, Ziz went into her classic defensive crouch. She dropped to the bathroom floor, closed her eyes, and went completely limp, pretending to be unconscious. Trooper Gibson later noted that she simply lay there, refusing to speak or acknowledge commands, acting as if she were dead on the ground. Using a portable fingerprint scanner, officers confirmed her identity, and her outstanding California warrants popped up. She continued to play dead even as officers snapped her mugshot, an image that's eerily reminiscent of Silence of the Lambs, if, Hannibal Lecter had joined a militant vegan cell. Inside that light-colored cloth bag Michelle had dropped off, police found the prize, the Smith & Wesson pistol, serial number matching the Vermont purchase, along with 5 boxes of ammunition. A search of Michelle's Subaru turned up $40,000 in cash hidden beneath the passenger seat. Coincidentally, a bank receipt for that exact amount was found in Daniel Blank's pocket. Surveillance footage from a Bank of America branch in Vermont later showed Blank pacing nervously before making the withdrawal, carefully unwrapping a tinfoil-covered mobile phone in the process. Ziz remained in custody for nearly 6 months. But through a series of legal adjustments, her bail was eventually slashed to $10,000 unsecured. All she had to do was provide a verifiable address. Predictably, the moment she hit the pavement, Ziz vanished into thin air again, a no-show at her next court date. Before her disappearance, records show that Maximilian Snyder, that data scientist currently facing trial for the murder of Curtis Lynn, was actively trying to raise funds to secure Ziz's release. It was a pretty glaring connection for someone who claimed to have no ties to her inner circle. Daniel Blank was released and subsequently vanished in April 2023. The final communication his father received was a video about farm animals, accompanied by a text that read,
"Look what you have done,"
seemingly a bitter reference to his parents' diet. Michelle was also processed and released. They fled immediately, leaving behind the car and $40K hidden inside. They later called their Aunt Roseanne, offering a bizarre defense. They claimed that the online philosophy forum Less Wrong had orchestrated the murders of Rick and Rita. It was a theory completely detached from reality. But for years, Michelle maintained their innocence, even publishing a sprawling 20-page open letter to the world in April 2025, claiming they were the victim of a conspiracy and floating another theory that their father had killed their mother in a murder-suicide. It was a classic Zizian defensive maneuver: obfuscate, intellectualize, and rewrite the narrative in the process. So far, we've talked about a few Zizians in connection to the Zajko double homicide. There's the couple's child, Michelle, their roommate, Daniel Blank, and, of course, the dear leader herself, Ziz Lasota. But court filings from January 2025 suggest the cult's ties to the murder may go even deeper. Another name surfaces: Felix Ophelia Buckholt, a member of the group who, according to travel records, flew into the US just hours before the Zajkos were killed. We'll have more on Ophelia later in the series. There's more than enough smoke to rouse suspicion here. There's the cries caught on a neighbor's Ring camera, the Smith & Wesson pistol, the evasiveness with law enforcement. And that's just off the top of my head. I feel pretty confident saying this. Michelle knows more than they're letting on. So let's take a closer look, both at their relationship with their parents and how they got tangled up with the Zizians in the first place. Let's start with the latter. By the time Michelle enrolled at Temple University for a master's in bioinformatics, they still seemed to be on a solid path. They'd interned at NASA and the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. They graduated in 2017. Their Twitter feed, active from 2011 until around the time they finished grad school, paints a picture of someone fairly normal. One tweet shows off their digital artwork. Others talk about wanting to venture outside their ideological bubble. Pretty innocuous stuff. But in a 2012 tweet, they praised CFAR, suggesting that rationalism had been on their radar for years, long before Ziz even entered the picture. In 2019, Michelle moved to California, and that's when things appear to shift. They got more involved in the rationalist movement. They also grew close with Alice Munday, whose name would later be tied to the trust that owned that Vermont property, where Michelle handed over their pistol during that voluntary interview. And somewhere along the way, maybe through Alice, maybe not, they crossed paths with Ziz. If there's a moment when the spell took hold, it's probably here. As reported by Rolling Stone, there's more to how Michelle found her way into this world in the first place.
Zajko became acquainted with Lasota and Blank through the rationalist community, an insular community that formed online in the early aughts with the goal of raising the sanity waterline. Many people, including Zajko, were introduced to the community via Harry Potter fan fiction written by Eliezer Yudkowsky, in hopes of finding others who would join his efforts to stop superhuman AI, which he believed could destroy its human creators before it was too late.
Gotta say, I did not have Harry Potter fanfic on my Zizian bingo card. But I digress. So if I'm law enforcement, I'm looking hard at Michelle's time in California between 2019 and 2021. That's where the shift begins, when rationalist philosophy starts to curdle into something more militant, more dangerous. It also lines up with the Westminster Woods protest, when Ziz and her crew seem to be actively recruiting, fishing the rationalist pool for anyone willing to dive deeper. Some additional reporting from the Boston Globe helps fill in the picture. Michelle and Alice Munday shared a hillside apartment in Albany, California, just north of Berkeley and about 30 miles from Curtis Lynn's trailer yard. When a reporter visited in early 2025, the new tenant pointed out a sticker inside the fridge. "Assume this phone is tapped." Repeated over and over. And the living room curtains? Stained with what looked like blood. But who knows? Maybe these crazy vegans were just having some beet juice. While speaking with Wired magazine, Roseanne Zajko said that Michelle seemed happy while living in California. But they and Alice Munday eventually moved to Vermont, citing the Bay Area's soul-crushing cost of living. And that move happened in 2021. By the time the two settled in Coventry, a remote town just 20 miles from the Canadian border, Michelle was growing increasingly distant from their family. Maybe it was the isolation of mountain life, or maybe they were already too far gone, having fallen under Ziz's influence back in California. Either way, thanks to their blog, we know they stayed in touch with Ziz after the move. In one post, Michelle recounts a disturbing exchange. Ziz allegedly told them that the only way to earn back her trust was to kill Alice Munday.
Ziz informed me that the only way I could gain her trust was to murder Alice, preferably sometime soon. Ziz helpfully suggested I use a gun with a potato as a makeshift suppressor, and that I might destroy the body with lye, and then told me that after I should video call and show her the body before I destroy it so she could get proof positive that I'd really done it. And if I didn't do it, Ziz planned to drive across the entire continental United States to murder me.
It's horrifying, but not unfamiliar. As covered in episode 2, lye was allegedly found in the Zizians' vehicles after the first attempt on Curtis Lynn's life. When heated to 300 degrees, lye can reduce a human body to liquid in about 3 hours. How's that for efficiency? Michelle's blog makes it clear. By the time they landed in Vermont, Ziz was already occupying prime real estate in their mind. There's admiration, yes, but it's rooted in fear. It's like reverence through coercion. And when that reverence includes instructions on how to dispose of a body, I'd say we're pretty firmly in cult territory. There's also some back and forth in the comments section of Ziz's blog, where Michelle admits to posting under various aliases over a span of about 2 years.
With the primary intent of figuring out if she was the kind of human she claimed to be.
But investigating Ziz is a bit like falling down a Reddit rabbit hole, only to realize at 3 a.m. that the thread doesn't actually go anywhere. Ziz presents herself as this elusive, four-dimensional puzzle of a person, as cult leaders typically do, by the way. But the longer you look, the more it starts to feel like smoke and mirrors, performance with no real core. Now, I've read through Ziz's blog so you don't have to. Let me just say, it's borderline unreadable. Esoteric to the point of parody. She clearly believes that obfuscation equals brilliance. In practice, it just reads as arrogant. And creepy. Definitely creepy. And it's not just me. Rolling Stone dug up a post from someone in the rationalist community who'd been sounding the alarm on Ziz years before any of this happened. Back in 2020, they wrote,
Ziz is a master manipulator. She is extremely skilled at selling people on nonsense ideas about decision theory and ethics that defy not just the rules of rationality, but basic common sense.
That's not hindsight talking. That is someone who saw it coming. Now, we'll dive deeper into the mental health aspect of all this in a future episode, where we'll explore the psychology of power and the strange gravitational pull that Ziz seems to have on her followers. In the meantime, if you're curious, links to archive versions of both Ziz's and Michelle's blogs can be found in the show notes for this episode. In a 2022 Tumblr post, Michelle expressed dismay over anti-trans media coverage and seemed to encourage their followers to take up arms.
If you don't own a gun, consider getting one, learning to shoot, and investigating community self-defense. Fascist militias are an arm of the anti-trans genocide who are acting as low-level enforcers.
Make no mistake, I don't take issue with the premise. Trans people are under attack. I don't think that's a controversial statement. But the call to arms? That suggests something else is going on, a deeper kind of radicalization. As for Michelle's relationship with their parents, there's not a ton to go off of. But the bits we do have, mostly from Tumblr, paint a complicated picture. In at least one instance, they alleged abuse. Claimed their parents forced them to eat meat, even though they knew Michelle was vegan. Said they threatened to put them in foster care, or worse, if they ever tried to run away. They also accused their Aunt Roseanne of turning a blind eye.
Some people don't want to hear about the ugliness in the world because then they feel obligated to do something about it.
Aunt Roseanne saw this, and she wasn't having it. She emailed Michelle.
I take issue with one of your posts where you said I knew about abuse but preferred to do nothing. That was a huge surprise to me. I felt that you stabbed me in the back with that comment.
Maybe it's just me, but it's hard to hear Roseanne's side of the story and not believe her. She doesn't strike me as someone with anything to hide. She confronted Michelle directly after seeing those Tumblr posts. She spoke openly with Wired magazine. She even said that she'd witnessed arguments between Michelle and their parents and had taken Michelle's side at least once. But nothing she saw came close to abuse. Now, I'm not in the family, I get that. But Roseanne reads like a good aunt, the kind you'd want in your corner. When the rest of the family kept their distance, she stayed close. And here's the kicker. Even after all that, Michelle was still listed as the sole beneficiary of their parents' estate. According to Pennsylvania probate records and some reporting, that inheritance could be worth several $1 million. Let that sink in. So if Michelle was involved in their parents' deaths, the motive might have been a financial one. A textbook case of they're worth more to me dead than alive. It might not have even been Michelle's idea. All they had to do was not get in the way. The group might have needed a cash infusion, and Rick and Rita became nothing more than a means to an end. As for the estate, court filings say the list of beneficiaries was, quote, being determined. Some tea leaves, though. An attorney hinted at a potential Slayer statute issue without elaborating. For context, Pennsylvania's Slayer statute is pretty straightforward. If you kill someone, you don't get their money. No exceptions. And no, this isn't the kind of Slayer who gets a theme song and a spin-off. This one gets cut out of the will entirely. For over 2 years, the case remained in a frustrating legal limbo. Michelle Zajko, Ziz, and Daniel Blank were deep underground, scattered across state lines, leaving law enforcement with one massive, lingering question. Who was the second person seen entering the home with Michelle in that Ring camera footage? Who was standing in that playroom with her? Years later, prosecutors would finally secure a murder indictment against Michelle, certain she arranged the deaths. But they would stop just short of naming her accomplice. The breakthrough that finally forced the hand of justice wouldn't come from an interrogation room. Instead, the net would tighten because of a completely separate tragedy at a snow-covered highway checkpoint in Vermont. A routine stop that ended with a dead Border Patrol agent, a massive federal manhunt, and a smoking gun that would tie the entire Zizian inner circle back to the blood on the playroom floor. That's ahead on Vegan Siths. Vegan Siths is a Tales from the Closet production. You can support the show and everything that comes next at patreon.com/talesfromthecloset. Please note, all quotes come from published sources. Some are read using AI.